situation, so hover is a pseudo class, which means when you target it with CSS, you say element, whatever the rest of the selector is, :hover, which is as though there were a class in that thing called hover, except that class isn't going to appear in the markup, right? That class just sort of is magically there whenever you hover the mouse cursor over it. It's a pseudo class. And there's not really a way to target that using the style property of an element. So that's why we can't just make that work the way we're doing this style so far. So one way we could deal with that is by actually looking for mouse events in the JavaScript. So I mentioned there's onMouseEnter and onMouseLeave. There's also mouseOver and mouseOut. onMouseEnter and onMouseLeave are more precisely what we want. That's exactly when the mouse cursor begins to hover and when it stops hovering. So we'll watch for those to happen. And what we'll do is update our state when that happens, which means we need state, which means this can no longer be a stateless functional component. It's going to have to be a full-blown component with a class. So class sidebar. Get rid of the arrow function thing and just go straight into curly brace. That means this return value is no longer a return value for the whole thing because the whole thing isn't a function anymore. Instead, that is the return statement for the render method. So just add render, curly brace. Now I'm going to indent all of this. And add another curly brace. And that's it. Now it's a class. Not that big a deal to switch between the two. Just make sure your return statement's inside a render method. So we said we need a constructor now because we need state, right? So we say this.state equals something. Now there actually is a forthcoming update to the standard that includes property initializers. So this wasn't in ES6. It's newer than that. It's a newer version of ECMAScript that is not a final version yet. But it is supported in Babel. It's supported in some browsers now too. Since we're running through Babel anyway, we don't necessarily have to worry about the browser support. And what that allows us to do is actually not put it in the constructor and just say state equals right here inside the class. So just right inside the class. I don't say this.state, I just say state. And I don't need to say const or anything. This is actually going to set the property of the class itself. So this is a new syntax that is currently not quite final. Does the same thing. So what I want to do is track whether or not I'm hovering over that thing. So I will just add something to my state. I'm going to say new icon hovered. It's going to be a Boolean, and it's going to be false by default. New icon hovered false. When I mouse enter, I want to make it true. Make sense? So let's make that happen. So it is this link here, the link that contains these two images. That's what I'm looking for the mouse to enter and leave. So I will add onMouseEnter equals, and I will put an arrow function that calls this dot handle mouseEnter. Why not? And I'll add onMouseLeave equals an arrow function that calls this dot handle mouse leave. Those don't exist yet, do they? So let's make them. So in addition to my render method, and I now have other methods, handle mouse enter and handle mouse leave. What did I say I wanted them to do? When the mouse enters, I want to update state so that new icon hovered is true instead of false. So I just call this dot set state. Pass in an object. New icon hovered True. That's it. I could probably put this all in one line. I think it's perfectly readable that way. So when the mouse leaves, this dot set state new icon hovered false. Now I haven't done anything to my style when I enter and leave yet, but I am changing the state. So let's just check out that much in the browser, see what that looks like. Well, cannot call a class as a function. What am I doing? I should have checked this in the browser earlier as soon as I changed it to a class. Render, return, blah, blah, blah. When do I try to call it as a function? At what point did I mess this up? Class, sidebar, here we go. Yep. Extends React.component. Yes, it assumed it was a functional stateless component because I forgot to inherit. I forgot to extend React component. Now we're good. So let's use our React Dev tools. Here we see our props. Let's look at sidebar. Notice in the React Dev Tools, there's a little search thing here. So I'm going to search for sidebar. There we go. There's my sidebar component. I have no props, but I have state. New icon hovered is false. Move my mouse over it. New icon hovered becomes true. Move it back out, becomes false. So it's working. So even before I make it actually change the icon, I can confirm that it is updating state by using my dev tools. Cool. Now let's make it actually change the appearance. So if you look at that style sheet, at what's supposed to happen when you hover, the one with the class of outline, which is the second one, that's the only reason I gave it that class, because they're two different images, and only one of them should do this. It changes the opacity to 0. Notice I also had a rule that the opacity should be animated if it changes. So opacity becomes 0 when you hover over the second of the two images. So let's see if we can make that happen. Here are the two images. Here's the second one. So since these are absolutely positioned, they are just one on top of the other. So whichever one is second in the markup is the one that's covering up the other one. And I want that one to become invisible when I hover over it. So this is the one that needs to change. So I have this new note image style that applies to both versions of the image. But now I want the second image to be opaque or not based on the value of this dot state dot new icon hovered. That thing that we're changing. That state value that we're changing. So I still want all of these styles to be there. But I also want this other style to be there. What to do? Well, here's a trick we can do. So instead of saying styles.newNodeImage, you can also just like put an object right there inside the curly braces. So you'll end up with two sets of curly braces. So you're putting an object literal inside the curly braces. Then you can write whatever style you want. Like I could set opacity equal to, well, 0 or 1, depending on the value of that thing in state, right? So this dot state dot new icon hovered. You know how to use ternaries? They're there in other languages. So it's like a one-line if-else. So this dot state dot new icon hovered. If it's true, if it is hovered, then I want it to be invisible, right? So opacity should be 0. else, if it's not hovered, then that means it should be covering it up, which means it should be opaque. So opacity is 1. So if I do just this, I should get the opacity to change, but I'm going to lose all my other styles, right? Yeah. Yep, it turns invisible all right. But I lost all the styles that came from styles.newNodeImage. So what I want to do is use all those styles in addition. So we used the spread operator on arrays the other day. That's when we put the 3 dots there, the ellipsis. And what that allowed us to do was break out all of the things that were in an array and put them in another array. So we put square bracket, ellipsis, in the name of some other array. And that takes all the items out of that original array, puts them in a new array. And that's how we copy an array. You can use the same trick to copy an object. Or to just copy all the items out of one object and put them in another. So I could put ... styles.newNodeImage, comma, and now all of the items, all of the styles that were in styles new node image are now inside my custom style here. So now I get all of those styles and my opacity rule. Et voila. This whole thing, by the way, is kind of a tangent. If this is a little too mind-blowing, don't worry about it. It's not the point of the class, but it's kind of a cool thing. Good stuff to know, but don't get hung up on this if this particular thing isn't necessarily clicking super well. So, handle mouse events in the sidebar. I'll call this. Questions about it, though?